Hello everyone, I'm Kim and welcome to my sewing room on this gloriously hot day, way too hot to do sewing. So I thought what I would do is I would dedicate this video to my Queen of Diamonds quilt and take you right back to when I got into EPP, English paper piecing, and bring you up to date with how my quilt stands at the moment. So I thought I'd just give you a little history lesson about EPP before I go on, because some of you might not even know what it is. So EPP stands for English paper piecing. It started as paper piecing back in the 1700s, and by 1830 it had become so popular it had made its way over from England to America. And at that time, Americans thought anything British was elegant. So they were the ones that renamed it English paper piecing, and the name stands to this day. So it's known as English paper piecing, EPP for short. And EPP is basically it's paper templates where fabric is wrapped around that template, and those templates are then sewn together. And I will show you a little bit later on the video how that's done. So how did I get into it? Well, I was visiting a stitch festival and I came across a store where there were some very bright and very simple but effective cushions on display, and they were EPP designs that had been stitched onto cushion fronts. And I was watching the lady wrap this fabric around the paper pieces and just thought, you know, I wouldn't mind having a go at that. I love hand sewing, so it just seemed perfect for me. So I watched her and I thought, right, I'll get some paper pieces and some jelly rolls. So I bought some paper pieces from her and I bought a small jelly roll, and the paper pieces I bought were hexes, so they're these shapes. So this one's already covered in fabric. And when I brought the fabric home, I started working on my hexes, and it was just really simple. It was just literally placing the paper piece onto the fabric, cutting around it, gluing the fabric into place, and then I started hand stitching all of the hexes together. So I made my first cushion. So this is the first cushion that I made with it. So I call this my rainbow cushion, but my husband calls it the pride cushion for obvious reasons. So each of these hexes has been hand stitched. So each row was stitched first, and then each row was then stitched onto the next row and made up this front, and then this was machine stitched onto the backing, hence a lovely, very effective cushion just made with really simple hexes. This is a great way to use up scraps as well, your scrap fabric. So that got me intrigued, and I found myself just playing around with templates, and I was on my phone one day and the Queen of Diamonds quilt came up, and people were being asked whether they wanted to subscribe to a project. And at this point I hadn't made a quilt before. I'd only made, you know, basic cushion. I hadn't made a quilt before, so it was quite a huge leap to go from making this cushion to making a full-blown quilt. But I thought, you know, I'd just give it a go. I mean, it can't be that difficult. And it wasn't, but it I do sometimes worry about how I believe in my abilities, but anyway, I signed up for the quilt and then I just sat back and waited for everything else to kick in. So the quilt was designed by a company called Pink Door Fabrics and Free Spirit Fabrics. They manufacture and print the Tula pink fabrics, and I'm a huge fan of Tula pink. Her fabrics are vibrant and the colours just seem to just match so well, so I was quite excited, and Tula's fabrics were probably what hooked me into subscribing to this project. So I paid my deposit and then you had to wait. So you sit back and wait, and then the first thing that turns up is the manual, and the manual has the quilt design in it. So this is the manual, and on the front page here, this is the quilt. So you can see how vibrant that is. I mean, it's got every colour you could possibly want, and it does incorporate a lot of Tula's fabrics. So not only did I get the pattern as part of my subscription, because I signed up for the whole thing, so I signed up for the pattern, I signed up for the paper pieces, the acrylics and the fabrics. So I was going to follow this process as set out, exactly as set out. I didn't want to go off onto a tangent because it's something I hadn't done before, so I wanted to behave myself and learn from this experience. So here I have all of the paper pieces. Now the paper pieces are all jumbled up because these have now been taken off the back of the blocks, so there are lots of different sizes and shapes, so you'll see those when I show you the blocks in a moment. So I had my paper pieces, and when I get a moment I will sit down and go through these and put them all back into their dedicated envelopes. I also ordered the template, the acrylic template, so these are all the different templates of all their various sizes. And they're nice and clear, so you can see the fabric through them. So when you're cutting the fabric out, you can see exactly how it will look once it's been sewn. So those were the acrylic templates. You don't need acrylic templates to do this quilt. You can literally just cut around the paper piece as long as you leave a seam allowance, and you know, it will work out exactly the same. But I like the idea of having the acrylics, because I thought if when I do come to make this quilt again in the future, I have the template. So for me it was an investment. So I also bought and the fabric was also included, so I bought the fabric as well, and the fabric was from the UK distributor Lovely Jubbly, so they provided the fabric and that came in monthly. On top of that, I purchased a few other things. So I bought some Orifil cottons, which they recommend that you use with quilting, but I have since learnt that you can use polyester thread if you want to. It's no big deal, but these are quite strong threads, and I have quite enjoyed using them. And I don't have many. I've made what colours I have work with the blocks. I also bought some beeswax, so I have a little beeswax lump, I think you call it. And generally what I do is when I thread my needle with cotton, I will just run the needle through the thread, and this just helps with limiting any knots. So that's my beeswax. And also purchased some applique needles, number 10 Big Eye. Now these needles are really fine, and but they do have big eye, so they are easy to thread, which is great for me because I've got my eyesight is not too great. But I usually like to hand sew with these, whether it's quilting or anything else. I do like hand sewing with these, so I always have a stash of those in. So I got my first block of fabrics from Lovely Jubbly. So when it came through, you would get a list of the fabrics and the names. And what I did was, because I can't remember the names of these fabrics, even though I'm a huge fan of Tula Pink, I just literally put on a post-it note what the fabric was, and then I would pin it to that fabric. So I knew exactly if I needed to go and find it at a later date, I knew I'd got the right piece of fabric. So I'll just show you the first month's diamonds. So there was this one, which was blue, and there was this one, also a blue one, and I think, yeah, so there are only 2 diamonds for that month. So literally when my fabric bundles came in, I would sit down and follow the instructions on each block. So with the first block, that's your first block. It gives you a list of what templates you needed to use, and this template reference is the same as the pattern piece that you needed to use, and also how many pieces of that template that you needed to cut in what fabric to make up this specific block. Oh, I would show you how you EPP. So I English paper piece using glue. You can, if you want, stitch the fabric onto templates. I prefer to glue, so I'm going to show you the gluing method. So you have your acrylic template, and the acrylic template has a seam allowance already around it, and you have a corresponding paper piece. So if I put that paper piece behind the template, you can see the seam allowance around the edge. So the acrylic template is placed on the fabric, and it's nice and clear, so you can position your template exactly where you need it, and you can get the best out of your fabric by fussy cutting fabric. And then you would use a rotary cutter and just cut along the edges of the acrylic. So once you have your fabric cut like this, your paper piece then sits on the back, so it will sit like that. Okay, and then I would start gluing. So I glue one side at a time, so use a glue pen. So these have refillable glue ends, and you can just buy refills for them. Now when I glue, I am really frugal. I do not use a lot of glue because it's not supposed to be a permanent fixture. It's just temporary until you hand sew. So the only time I use a little bit more glue is I use more glue at the end to make sure that I get a crisper point. So I'll just demonstrate that. So first of all, I put quite a bit on it so you can actually see it, because it can look a bit clear. So the glue's gone on, it's blue, so you make sure you've got some on your fabric and on the template and the fabric, and then you just literally roll the fabric over and squeeze, and that's one side. Okay, so then I'd move on to the next corner, the next side, sorry, and I'd put my glue on again. And there's the glue. Now if you look very carefully, you can see I do not put glue at the very edge of the template, because that is where I'm going to stitch. So I don't want any glue on the edge of that paper piece, because it will just make it more difficult for you to put your needle through the fabric. So once I've got that, I just generally put a little bit more glue on the ends, because they're the parts of the template which you really need to get nice and tight and crisp. And you just carry on doing that all the way around the template, and then you'll end up with a paper piece that is covered in fabric. So you can see it has a little tail, a little dog tail, both ends. Okay, and then you have another one. So when you get your templates together and you need to stitch them together, you can see that if I put these two together, this tail here will then sit behind this tail at the top, so they just nestle in and sit one on top of the other, so they're not butting into each other. And so once you have them together, you just literally put them right sides together and you align the two ends. Okay, and this is where you stitch. So this is your stitching line. Now I don't use a thimble. I don't feel the need to use a thimble, because if I find anything a struggle and I'm struggling to get the needle into the fabric, then it's obviously not going to go, because maybe I'm trying to put that needle not just through the fabric but through the paper piece, and you don't really want to put it through the paper piece. There's enough room between your your paper and the fabric to go around that. There's a tiny little sort of area at the edge of that fabric, edge of that template, where you can easily pick up the fabric, and you only need to pick up a few little strands of the fabric. So I'm going to try and film how I stitch this quite closely, so hopefully you'll be able to see how I hand stitch, and I'm going to do it in a contrasting thread so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So here I have my two paper pieces covered in fabric, and this is how I want them to go. So I want this little dogtail here to sit underneath, so it sits nicely under the top there. So that is what I want. So once I've got my dogtails going in the right direction, then I can place the two pieces right sides facing, and then I just spend a bit of time just ensuring that they are nicely level. So I've got the points here together and the points here also together. So I just basically hold the two pieces together very gently. I don't use any force at all, don't use a thimble, and I start off by putting a knot into the end. So I pick up the tiniest bit of fabric, and I'm trying to do this obviously with a camera in front of me, so it might take me a bit of time, but you can see there's only a tiny little bit of fabric, so that will go through, and the thread has wax on it, beeswax, so it glides through quite nicely. And then I leave a little tail, and I hold the tail down with my finger, or my thumb I should say, and then I go back through the end again, push the needle through, and then once I've got a loop, I will then put the thread through once and twice, and that in effect makes a knot, and I just pull it nice and tight, so it keeps that end really tight and closed, so you don't want any gaps. So I have my little tail here, and I just basically just lay that on the top, and I work that into both of the templates. So I do the next stitch, just literally take my time. You can see there's just tiny little bits of fabric that you grab with your needle, and it does seem to get caught quite a lot, so you just work your way across quite slowly. Now I'm just going to move this tail out of the way. I would normally keep it there and enclose it in between the thread, but so that you can see properly, you can see me stitch each of these together. So you can see how easily that should go in. So I've only picked up 2 strands of fabric, and you just do the same on the bottom, and it should just literally glide through, and then you just carry on like that all the way across. Now obviously if you're doing this in using thread that obviously works with your fabric, you won't see these little stitches. And I do actually have my stitches quite close together, probably have way too many, but it's a personal preference again. Now when I stitch from the front of me, so from my body outwards. A lot of people might think that I use too many stitches, but it is up to you really. I quite enjoy sitting in the evenings doing this. So as I'm coming near the end, you can see there's a little dogtail here in the way. So literally all I do is just push him out of the way, hold him down, no pressure at all, and then just carry on. And as I'm going through, I'm not hitting the paper at all. In effect, the needle literally glides on top of the paper, so you shouldn't really go through any paper. And then when I get to the end, I just make sure I get the very end bit and go through, and I do exactly what I did at the front. Got a loop, go through once, go through twice, and that gives you a knot. And I tighten that up, and then I will open it out, and then I get my fabric opened out and flat, and then I will just literally tie it off. So you can see there, you can see all the contrasting thread there. This tail would normally be buried in between all of those stitches, and then if you look at the front, you can see the stitches there. But if this was done in a white, they would literally be invisible, you wouldn't see them at all. And you can see, if you look very carefully, it's just grabbed the tiniest bit of fabric, and it's nice and tight on both ends. When I started this project, I also signed up to the Facebook group because I haven't done anything like this before. I found the Facebook group really supportive because there were a lot of people who were experienced quilters also going through this process. So it was nice that they would drop, you know, tips and tricks on how to do things. So it was very useful being part of that group. And because I was in the UK, our blocks came a little bit later than those in the US. So the US were ahead of us, which for me was great because I would wait for experienced quilters to do their thing, and then they would put images in and they would say things like, you know, be aware of that and be aware of this. Not everybody used the fabrics suggested in the book. They went off and did their own thing. But for me, because this is my first quilt, I decided to follow everything to the T. The next stage was to put the borders on the templates. Now, when you are cutting the pieces of fabric to make up the blocks, some of those pieces are actually cut on the bias. So the fabric can have a habit of moving around. But when you get to putting the borders onto the diamonds, the borders are actually cut on the grain. So they then give stability to that diamond. So I have put a video in of how I prepared the diamonds before I put the borders on. So I would spend a bit of time taking the paper pieces out, cutting the borders and colour coordinating them, and then at the end I would stitch them, machine stitch them onto my diamonds. So I'll put those videos in so you can see those, and I will see you at the other end. So here you can see Tula Pink's Mick Jagger fabric, which is the fabric selected for the borders and will work really well with all the different coloured diamonds. This has been cut as per instructed in the manual on the grain, though I am cutting mine just a little bit wider. All the borders have now been cut, so I'm just picking out each of the diamond shapes and selecting the borders which match the colours within that shape. The next step is now releasing the paper pieces from the back of the diamond shapes. So here I am pressing, not ironing the shape. So once the shape has been pressed, I will flip it over and start releasing using a stiletto tool
the fabric from the back of the paper pieces. There are some parts of this template which are a little bit more stuck down because I've used more glue where the points are. So I'm just taking my time, just releasing that paper piece from the back of the shape. So I'm continuing to work around the shape, and the side pieces are a little bit different because you need to make sure that the seam allowance is completely flattened, because this is the area where the border will be stitched on. Now all the paper pieces have been removed, I give it a good spray of starch and press, and this will make the diamond stiffer and easier to handle when applying the borders. So here you can see I'm working slowly around the diamond, pressing each of those seams flat. As I'm flattening out each piece of fabric, you can see there is an edge that hasn't been stitched. This is a piece of fabric that was folded to the back of the paper piece. This isn't a problem because when you come to stitch your border on, that will then be in the seam allowance. So the pre-selected border strips are now going to be stitched onto the diamond, and because they were cut on the grain, they will add stability to the shape. So here you can see I've stitched 2 borders on and I've started to press. I pressed the wrong way to start with, but I did correct this further down the line. So here I am just trimming up the borders in readiness for the next 2 borders to be stitched on. So the next 2 borders are pinned on, stitched and pressed in the right direction this time. So the diamond is now given a really good press and the last 2 borders are trimmed up. So this is the last stage of completing the diamonds. I'm taking my time to cut around the borders. Now the manual suggested that you cut to 1 1/4 and I actually cut to 1 1/2 because I'm trying to make my quilt just a little bit bigger, so I'm taking my time and making sure that it is precisely 1 1/2 inches wide. The borders have all now been trimmed to perfection and the diamond is now complete.
I'm immensely proud of how they've turned out. They are beautiful, and there's still a lot of work to go into this quilt. So the finished size of this quilt is 60 inches by 73.5 inches. So I decided I actually wanted this quilt to be a little bit bigger, and I've taken advice from those who have been putting comments up on the Facebook group that if you want to make it bigger, there are things that you can do. And one of the first things was to make the border slightly bigger. So the border originally was 1.25 inches. So I've just made my border 1.5 inches. So I've just made it very slightly bigger, but obviously over the whole thing that will be, you know, that will make a significant difference. So here we go with all of the blocks so far. So this is block number 1, month 1, and I have the window open so everything's swaying in the wind. So you can see the border, I have picked a colour to complement what's already in that diamond. So that's block 1, and this is the second block. So when these blocks are made up, they are, and the paper pieces are taken off, they are starched. So they are starched and ironed, which also gives them a little bit more stability. But the border itself will stop them from stretching out of shape. So you can see the border here is a lot pinker to complement the colour already in that diamond shape. And there's little ladybirds. So usually every month you would get 2 blocks to complete. So all of these would be, each piece of this fabric would be cut out and then you would stitch them together. And the book will tell you the order of how you would stitch them. So this is a half block, and this will sit on one of the edges. So this will be cut away, that little bit down the middle will be cut away because this is an edge block. And this is also an edge block, but this is a little bit different. So this will sit at the bottom, and I've left these extensions on because I'm not really too sure. I'm a bit frightened to cut them off, to be honest, but I thought I'll cut them off when I know for sure that they can be cut off. And there's 2 of those, so they'll be put on the bottom somewhere. So you can see all of this fabric is absolutely beautiful. It is Tula pink fabric. And now you can see the borders. I mean, I've picked the borders so that they match with the colours in the block. So you can see they just look so nice. I'm just so pleased. And they recommend that you do this. They do give you a lot of advice working through it. And the Facebook group also release videos on each month to just go over what you should be doing. This was done with a magic mirror, which I'm still trying to get to grips with, but it's really, really pretty. So the border is slightly different on this. I've got a bit of orange and a bit of blue. Some of the blocks are really, you know, quite simple. These got really big templates in them. So this block didn't actually take too long to make up. But even so, it's still very, very effective. And a beautiful end block with the lion, and also coordinating borders. I'm really pleased with how the borders have come out, because I think if I had not been told to try and colour match, I would have just put anything. But I do think they just complement those diamonds really well. So that's another end block. I'm going into the corals. And the nice thing is, when Lovely Jubbly sent me the fabric bundles, they just were so generous with the fabric, to the point that, you know, I had quite a lot of fabric left. I mean, some of the fabric they provided, you would get like a fat quarter or half metre, and you only needed to cut 1 or 2 lion heads out, and you'd have so much left. So you have been spoilt with how much of the fabric has been left. And I have read on the Facebook page that some people have carried on to make a second one using up the scraps from their bundles. Beautiful detail in those lions. And then we get to the giraffe, so we're going into sort of this bluey green. Another end piece. So sort of pink and purple, so I've tried to bring that colour into the border. And if I show you on the back here, you can see what I mean by the overlaying of these. They all sort of concertina around, so they don't sort of bump into each other. And it is all about how you fold over that fabric on each of the templates. And obviously if you fold it wrong, it's just stuck down, so you can undo it and you can just refold it. Nothing is permanent. Another edge block. A birdie on a hippo's head. A blue elephant this time. And this one was quite tricky because there are lots of tiny little triangles here that all meet in the middle, and you can see from the back it is all slots in very nicely. So and I think because you do that, the points all meet perfectly in the middle, so I was quite pleased with how that came out. And last of all, we have a side block. Oh no, 2 more. So I have a side block here with flowers. So this will be cut down the middle, so all of this bit here you won't see. And another little hippo with a birdie, a blue one this time, and that's an edge block. So those are all the blocks which make up the quilt. And they all have their corresponding borders on, and I'm really pleased with how they have come out. The next stage now is to apply cornerstones and sashing. So the cornerstones, I'll show you. The cornerstones are these coloured pieces, coloured diamonds, which join up all the other diamonds, and the sashing is this white fabric that connects all of the borders together. So I have the fabric to make all of the cornerstones, and I also have all of the sashing fabric to bring this together. And so all I need now is just to sit down and cut it all out. But I just need to read a few more things up on the Facebook group to make sure I'm doing everything right, and if there are any hiccups that people experienced whilst doing that part of the process, and then once I've read that and I'm happy, I will then start to cut out all of that, all of the cornerstones and the sashing, and then start applying that to the diamonds. And this will then bring all of the quilt and make it into one quilt top. So I'm quite excited because I'm nearly getting there. So hello, I thought I'd quickly pop back into the video because I thought it was worth mentioning a book that I have, which I have found immensely useful whilst learning EPP, and it is the All Points Patchwork book by Diane Gilliland. And in this book she covers literally everything you could possibly want to know about EPP. So I thought I would just share with you a few pages to give you a taster of what's in this book. She covers all the various shapes. Now she has stitch based, but she also shows you how to glue based. She also shows you how to whip stitch two templates together, and I actually use her method. So I stitch from my body out and she shows you how to do that. And at the back she also has lots of different projects that you can practice your EPP on. So here for instance she has a little toy that she has made out of tumbler pieces. So it's definitely a great book to have in your library. And for me personally, if I didn't have any of the other books, I would definitely want this one as a first book. It's very useful, so I thought it was worth sharing. So I'll hand you back over to the other me. Bye. I hope you've enjoyed my update on my Queen of Diamonds quilt. And if you have enjoyed the content of this quilting special edition, I would love it if you would subscribe. But if you are a regular subscriber, thank you for turning up yet again and watching and listening to me go through one of my projects. And I hope you all have a lovely week sewing, and I will see you all very soon. Take care. Bye.